If you want to teach music lessons and you don't know where to start, this is the video for you. Hi, I'm a music teacher and this is my life. Welcome back to the channel, everyone, and welcome for those of you who might be new here. Now, if you are new here, what you might not know is that I have nearly a decade's worth of experience teaching private music lessons. And so maybe you're someone out there who's ready to start teaching music lessons. Maybe you're someone in teacher's college or a university student. You're looking for a way to supplement your income and use the skills you already have, but you're not sure where to start. Well, in this video, I'm going to share a lot of different tips with you that I hope you'll find helpful on this journey to hopefully start teaching private music lessons. But before we get started, be sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so that you never miss another video. The number one piece of advice that I would give you is to define your studio first. So you want to think about things like, what instruments will I teach? And it should be something you're pretty comfortable teaching. What difficulty levels or skill levels can you teach? So are you only teaching beginner? Can you teach beginner and intermediate? Can you teach all the way up to advanced? And what age range would you like your students to be? Some people are not very comfortable working with adults. Some are the opposite. They feel more comfortable with adults and they don't feel as comfortable with children. I've taught students of many different age ranges, so you just need to decide what's going to work best for you and what you're comfortable with. You can also tailor this to your skill set. So if I use myself as an example, flute is my best instrument, so I can teach beginner, intermediate, and advanced flute. But if I'm honest with myself, if I were to teach, let's say, a saxophone student or a voice student, I would probably only teach beginner and intermediate. And then if I think of an instrument like the voice, I'm not classically trained, so I might be able to teach an intermediate or advanced vocalist if they are singing in a different genre or style. But if they were looking for classical training, then they might be better off finding a different teacher with more classical training. So you want to keep your specific skill set in mind. Another really important aspect of defining your studio is choosing a work location, and you have a few options here. You can choose to work from home, where your students travel to your house and you deliver music lessons. You could choose to work from the student's home, so you drive to them, and that might mean building the price of your mileage into your lesson price, but stay tuned for that. You could also choose to work at a music school where you meet the student at a different building, you teach the lessons there, and then you go home. Or you can choose to teach online. There are still people who choose to do virtual lessons, though in my opinion, I prefer to teach in person so that there's no technical difficulties or Wi-Fi issues. But since the pandemic, teaching music lessons online is still a pretty common option that's available. Now, this next section is going to apply to you most if you are working for yourself versus if you are going to be working for a music school, and that is to establish prices and policies. If you're working for yourself, then you're going to be able to set your own prices, and so you want to make sure that you are choosing a fair rate. If you underprice yourself, then you may be devaluing your skills, but if you overprice, then people may choose less expensive teachers in the similar area over you. So you want to make sure that you do a little bit of research, see what other prices are out there, and try to find that perfect middle ground where you're not undervaluing your skills or overvaluing your skills. You should also create a clear studio policy. Now, if you're working for a music school, chances are this already exists and the school has one that applies for all students and with all teachers. But a studio policy should include things like a payment schedule, cancellation policy, and how much notice they can give you before they cancel. So the average for me has been 24 hours notice prior to the lesson, and up until that point, it won't count as a paid for lesson. But if they give me less than 24 hours notice, and this is common with all music schools that I've worked at, then yes, I would still be paid for that lesson if I'm given less than a day's notice. A studio policy should also have some clear expectations for your students. So what are they expected to bring to the lesson, and what would the practice commitments be like? Are there any recitals coming up throughout the year? Is there a way to sign up for that? But you want to have all of those policies in place so that they know ahead of scheduling the lessons and paying for it what your expectations are for your students. And if you're someone who's planning on opening your own music school, then you would greatly benefit from having some type of professional payment system. So some type of invoicing system or point of sales machine, having all of that set up so that you are all ready to go anytime a new person wants to sign up and pay in advance. Now, these next few tips will apply to anyone, regardless of if you're teaching for yourself or for a music school, but you have to make sure that you get a police background check. I'm someone who works with kids for my regular day job as a high school teacher already, so I already had my vulnerable sector check, which is what it's called in the area where I live. But you need to make sure that you get a police background check that includes working with vulnerable peoples, which would include people under the age of 18 as well as seniors. The reality is that just about every music school that I've ever worked for has asked me for this so that they know that I can be trusted to work with children without parental supervision. And if you don't have that, you are limiting yourself to only teaching adults. And if you're okay with that, then that's totally fine. But not having that background check could be a big barrier for some of your possible students. You should also be keeping detailed records of things like invoices, expenses, student progress, and things like that. If you're working for a music school, then they may be keeping track of all of your invoices for you. But if you're teaching music lessons, then most of the time you're considered either self-employed or an independent contractor. But in the eyes of the government, you're not having regular tax amounts deducted from your paycheck. So you're going to have to set some of that money aside so that later on you have to pay that tax to the government. I'll leave a link in the description below where I talked a little bit more in detail about how to launch your own music business. And I talk a little bit more about the tax part of teaching music and being an independent contractor, but keeping all of these records is going to be really important come tax time. Marketing and recruitment will vary depending on if you're working for a music school or for yourself. But if you're working for yourself and you need to do all the marketing yourself, here are some things you can try. Having a positive and professional online presence is going to make a huge difference. So this could be something like creating a professional music teaching Instagram account or a simple website that has a little bit about your background experience, your education, your rates, where you teach. All of those things can be really important just so that people can find you easier. And if you have students and they start talking about you through word of mouth, they can pass on that information to other potential students in the future. You could then take this website with your contact information and pricing and availability and take it with you to different networking opportunities. So you could post business cards or other things, posters maybe at places like community centers, maybe talk to your local churches or other houses of worship. Could you maybe reach out to some of the music teachers at various high schools or elementary schools in the area and let them know that you are available to teach private music lessons for certain instruments? But all of those networking opportunities will be only further enhanced by the fact that you have a professional looking website with your teaching philosophy, your availability, and all of those other important details. And this is also really important for parents who want to know what you're all about and what your pricing is for their kids' lessons. And the next one's really common, which is to offer a free trial lesson. Now, I actually work at two different music schools where the first trial lesson is paid. But if I was working just for myself, I've been happy before just to offer a free trial lesson. So the first lesson, just for me to meet the student and for them to meet me, for me to get a sense of where their skill level is and what goals we could set together and talk to them a little bit about what they're hoping to get out of the lessons so that we can kind of co-create that plan together. Once you do all of that, it's time to find some resources. Now, if you're teaching an instrument that you went to university for, then chances are that over the years you have built yourself quite the collection of great resources. But you might also want to consider what are some other resources out there. Maybe a book full of warm-ups or etudes or other things that you could use or recommend to your students if they were to go out and purchase their own copy that you would like them to use in lessons. And you need to do this ahead of time so that you can walk into that first or second lesson with recommendations. You could also gather some supplemental aids, so maybe things like flashcards would be helpful, or theory handouts, or various other tools. But I know for myself, it's typically things like method books, fingering charts, metronomes, other kinds of resources like that, and also some repertoire. Now, this next section might go without saying for some people, but you have to plan effective lessons. You need to start with the end in mind, right? So what is the goal that you have for your student? Are they working towards a certain performance in the future? Are they a beginner and they're trying to just get a sound out of the instrument? Are they trying to learn good form in terms of their posture and holding the instrument properly while they play? I was just talking to my private flute student yesterday about not resting their back elbow on a chair, right? They need to lean forward a little bit so that they're not sitting at the back of the chair. Little things like that for beginners are a big deal, but you need to be able to understand what the goal is and how the student is going to get there. If you know the student has a half-hour lesson, then you need to plan how long is their warm-up going to be, and then how long do they spend on repertoire or etudes or other things. And this will also greatly depend on the age level, right? So for older students, usually they're okay in terms of having a longer warm-up and longer lessons. Their attention span is longer. With younger kids, half an hour to 45-minute lessons might be better for them. And so I can adjust the timings of each phase of the lesson, warm up, etudes, repertoire, and things like that a little bit differently depending on the length of the lesson. And you need to find a balance between planning those smaller goals, which can lead to bigger goals, and keeping the different lessons as interactive and fun, right? You want to make sure there's a little bit of back and forth. You're encouraging when you see improvement. You're asking, okay, let's take a look again. You're asking them some questions if you hear something funny, right? And you want to make sure that you are helping them move forward, but while also keeping the lessons fun. If the lessons aren't enjoyable, they're not going to come back, and that's not good for your business. Now, as someone who's got almost a decade of teaching experience specifically with private music lessons, let's talk about how to teach. The number one best thing that you can be as a teacher is patient. And I know for some people, patience can be really tricky. I've had teachers who were not very patient before, and it's very discouraging. But you know your students well enough to know when you can be a little bit more pushy and try to encourage them, but motivate them. But sometimes it's just frustrating to not get a sound out of the instrument, or to make the same mistake in the same piece over and over again. Or you're singing and you keep getting the wrong words. Your students usually know when they've made a mistake, and it's okay to acknowledge the mistake, but you want to be patient with them because, again, it's all about balance. You don't want them to feel too discouraged. So you want to be patient, and it's really paid off for me. That same flute student I mentioned earlier, during our first half-hour lesson, could barely get a sound out of the instrument. And to hear the way they sounded yesterday, where they're playing multiple different notes with the instrument assembled, and then we're now looking at dynamics. They're able to play a nice smooth crescendo and decrescendo. They've come a long way, and it's only been like a couple of months. So it just goes to show that if you're patient with your students, sometimes they will rise to the occasion and great things will happen. If you're introducing music theory during lessons, do yourself a favor and do this very gradually. The most fun part of lessons is the playing, and unless they've come to you specifically for theory tutoring, then I would just go through that as it comes up in the repertoire, right? So maybe you notice a certain run in the passage. Oh, this is an E major scale. It's just they start on a G sharp or something, right? So little things like that, if you notice them in the repertoire, then you can introduce it, because students are going to see this as not just theory for the sake of theory's sake, but theory for the sake of actually helping them in their playing. And that is going to be a big motivating factor. And this next piece of advice is coming from me, someone who was not told this from a young age, but it's how to practice. How do you practice smarter, not harder? And I made a whole YouTube video about how to maximize your practice time. I can leave that link down below as well. But if you have an hour, that's great to practice, but maybe some days are really busy and you only have 30 minutes. How do you make every minute count? Right? So maybe you start always with a warm up. And then if you're working on a certain piece of music, how do you narrow it down into the different sections, right? How do you prioritize certain passages? If you have a really, really difficult passage, how do you approach that? And remember, practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. So if your students don't know how to practice effectively, they just end up wasting their time and practicing the wrong things. And it's really hard to unlearn bad habits. So you don't want them to fall into that. So teaching them how to practice, to maximize their practice time, to make every minute count is really, really important. And along the same lines here, you should also include things like how to use a tuner, how to use a metronome, and I'll leave links for my videos on those down below as well. And all of these resources are here to try and help you with your music teaching. And like I said before, make sure that you're providing positive and frequent constructive feedback. Notice I said feedback and not criticism. You can give your student positive feedback while also giving them constructive feedback. Okay, your dynamics were great, but the rhythm wasn't quite right on this bar. Let's try it again, or let's take a closer look. You want your students to feel encouraged, and if they are signing up for music lessons, you want them hopefully to come back for more lessons in the future so that you can see them develop their musicianship, and also it's good for business. When all of this is said and done though, you as a teacher also need to focus on yourself and your personal and professional growth. When it comes to your professional growth, finding a mentor can be very beneficial. This could be someone you look up to, this could be someone you share different teaching strategies and best practices with, because they might have a suggestion that you never thought of or that you haven't tried before. And this can be really helpful for you and your students. You also don't want to just give up all of your musical passions, right? So as an example, I teach music lessons at 2 different schools and I teach at a high school, but I'm also part of the worship team at church where I play the flute, I play the cajon, and I sometimes sing. And for me, that's a place where I just get to play an instrument and have fun. Yes, I'm the junior choir director, so I do have a professional paid role there. But when I am playing as part of the worship team with the senior choir and the instrumentalists, I just feel like I'm part of the team and I'm back in musician mode and less in teacher mode. And so it's a way for me to still have a positive and fun outlet for me to express myself through music and not just think of myself as the person in charge all the time. You want to make sure that music is still fun for you, because if music is fun for you, then you'll probably end up being a more fun teacher. And the last tip that I'm going to give you today is to check in with yourself and regularly reassess the way you teach. Has your philosophy updated? Have you learned a different strategy that you can try with some of your students? Are you going to structure your lessons differently? What are things that you're doing now that are working well? And what are things that maybe aren't working the best they could? And how could you evaluate that? Right? You also want to make sure that you're kind of holding up a mirror to your own self and not just assessing your students, but how effectively are you teaching them? What could be better and what's going well? So that's it for this video, folks. I hope you found it helpful. These are all of the things that someone maybe should have told me when I first started teaching music lessons, but I hope you found it helpful. I will leave all of the videos that I mentioned earlier linked in the description below. Let me know in the comments what you found helpful and what other kinds of videos you'd like to see on the channel. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell, and give us a follow on Instagram. And as always, I will see you right back on this channel with another brand new video very soon. Bye, everyone.